Hello, my name is Eric, and I wanted to go over my coaching portal website, which was part of my EdTech 544 class on instructional coaching. Before I get into that, one of the questions we were asked to address was how do we view ourselves as a coach? And so I thought about this in like a traditional sense, like what do I like and admire about sports coaches? And things I kind of came up with were many of them were former players themselves. Many of them had multiple experiences on different teams, either as players and as coaches and or they worked themselves up through the ranks of coaching, maybe as an assistant coach or a specialty coach, and then kind of got a head coaching job. Um, and they're able to connect with players, I think is a hugely important thing, both managing superstars and the talented ones, and also developing players that may not already be there yet. And they have to have thick skin and believe in themselves because they do face a lot of criticisms. They have to have goals and visions and stick to them. And they need to be able to handle that criticism and adapt to change. And so, similarly, that's how I view myself as an instructional coach. I am a former teacher with a multitude of experiences at different grade levels and different institutions. In 10 years, I taught at every level of K-12 plus some university coaching there, or university teaching, I should say. And I'm able to work with and have empathy for many different types, similar to the traditional coach. Um, that would be all demographics of age and backgrounds. I've worked with adult learners, those kind of things. And I like to think I can recognize the existing talent in people and also the existing potential in people. I'm not always right, but to have thick skin and persevere, learn from mistakes and move on, and have to be able to adapt to change. So those are kind of the answer that I had with that question. And before I launch into my actual site, I do want to share something else. I'll give you some context. This is from a different presentation uh, that I made, but it'll kind of set up the situation. I based my coaching portal on a previous job that I had where I was a technical support person for a physical therapy program that taught through distance learning. So specifically, I worked at a satellite campus in Meridian, and there were two cohorts teaching at the same time from the main uh, instruction took place on both campuses, and we connected the two cohorts together. And that's an important distinction I want to point out is I'm talking about when I talk about distance learning and video conferencing in this context, I'm talking about a classroom with a live instructor and a live student audience connected to another classroom also with an instructor and a live student audience. A lot of times they're switching where the instruction is coming from. A lot of times they're up in lab spaces and things like that because it is a physical therapy program. Um, and so essentially it's like a maybe a more complicated Zoom meeting. And in fact, the institute I worked at, Idaho State, did use Zoom as its main hub. But instead of just having individuals connecting into the Zoom meeting, as you could see here, we had these two classrooms connecting. And sometimes there were students or individuals connecting in separately, but essentially it's like a accelerated Zoom meeting. But unlike a Zoom meeting where you're sitting in front of your own machine, these classroom ones rely on the infrastructure of the classroom. So there's cameras, touch panels, oftentimes the instructor's wearing a microphone that's hot all the time. And so the people in the room, the students and the instructors, have to know how to use that. Rarely is there just one camera involved, for example. So, and then you have to make sure that it's happening on both campuses. So there's make sure that everybody can see the right content, make sure you don't wander out of the shot. There's a lot of technical considerations. So that's kind of the perspective of where I'm coming from. I think it's important. I don't think the instructors need to become experts on it, but they do need to know because it can get kind of complex. As I said, a lot of times in physical therapy and some of the health sciences, they're doing a combination of lecture work, as you can see down here in the corner, but sometimes they'll move out and spread out and use these tables and demonstrate things. And so you do have to have some mastery of the cameras and the technology. We've all been in the meeting where suddenly they walk out of the shot and you can't see what's going on, or even worse is you step away from the microphone and now we can't hear anymore. So those things become even more important when you're doing education. And if the signal goes out, then it's not very good. So that's kind of the quick background of where I'm coming from, and hopefully that will give you some a little bit more perspective. So here's my actual coaching website. Let me just check real quick. Yeah, so in my elevator speech, I kind of talked about that, maybe my specialty in video conferencing. Um, and I mentioned working with people and technology because I'm a social person. And ultimately, well, here's something I observed, I guess, is I think that instructors have a lot to bring to the table anyways. In other words, these different disciplines have good things going and they overlap a little bit, but I think a coach can kind of come in here and bring all this together. So a lot of what I hope to do as a coach would be bring those existing ideas to other people, the good ideas, share what's already known, and then also hopefully I can add my own experience to it. But ultimately, my goals were to improve the performance of the team and to make our programs more efficient um, uh, and fun and rigorous. Okay. A little bit more about me. I talk about my background in video, and just a takeaway from that is every video production I worked on in every other genre of news, documentary, sports, reality television, they spent a lot of attention to the technical and aesthetic components. And when started doing video for education, I recognized that it's often an afterthought or a good enough mentality. Just for a quick example, football game. It's about a 3 or 4 hour actual television production, but there's often a whole set day with a crew of 20 to 50 people working on that just for a 2 or 3 hour broadcast. And I don't think we need to make every uh, teaching experience into a movie or a sports production, but I do think that we can make the experience better by looking at those things. So I'm kind of blending my parallel careers there. So just some technical stuff here. I talked about what I can offer. This is something I learned from the class was that it should be iterative, repeated and over again. So that was something I took away from the class. In my revision process, I recognize that this booking form, I didn't put these fields on here for name, phone number, and address. And so on the revision part, I recognize, oh, I got to fix that. So I added those things, and then I just try to collect some basic information. Uh, sorry, that was a bump. And then I linked my calendar there too. So a lot of people kind of stuck to that. And or had similar ideas, and I kind of played on that idea. Back up here, my main guides. I would say my guiding standards. Maybe the weakest part of this, I linked to the ISTE standards for educators and the ISTE standards um, for students. I know the International Society for Technology and Education is respected in EdTech circles. I did put my honor code here, which I borrowed and credited to a previous student. However, I don't think I could have said it any better. So those are just things you can read, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this review process for that. My tutorials focus on that goal of efficiency. This was kind of before I decided what I wanted to do my professional development in, but hopefully a lot of people can use these, but the theory being that uh, in education there's a lot of cyclical messaging. In other words, every semester you got to send out this reminder every whatever. And so I talked about in those repeat. I realized this actually from a colleague pointed out, hey, you're kind of sending the same stuff over and over again. So this tutorial just kind of walks you through how to create a template for those common correspondences. I linked to some existing videos out there, and then I made some step-by-step instructions for how to do it in Gmail specifically. Again, I'm not going to go over the details of this, but hopefully it's intended to be like a step-by-step guide that anybody could come to this and look at it and understand how to do it and hopefully put it to use. And then again, I added a link to a survey that will explain or that so I can get some feedback on that. My second one was about schedule send, which is a feature within Gmail and other email providers. It simply says that you can craft an email and schedule it to go out at a later time. An example would be you want to hit them first thing Monday morning, but you're not going to be here first thing Monday morning. So you can set the message to go out then. Or, another one is I'm writing the email at 4 a.m. and I don't want to look like a psycho. So you can use that tool to send out those emails. And also then you can just cross them off your list of things to do. So those are efficiency things. I try to keep my feedback things sort of short and sweet. I put only one mandatory question, which was if you found it helpful or not. Hopefully people would take the time to answer the other ones, give me a little bit more detailed feedback on their preferred learning method and whether my tutorial was um, detailed enough and had the correct information, the amount and uh, correct amount and the level of detail that it needed. My curated sources, I focused on graduate education. So here's a thing from the Institute of Education Sciences. They talk about specifically supporting graduate students in technology mediated formats. And then this is from NIH, the National Institute of Health, because my audience is largely teaching in health sciences. Those are some articles that talk about specifically those things that can be applied to a lot of different ones. Obviously, I could have more here, and I'm sure there is more. My second resources, these all focus on the LMS of Canvas. Again, nothing else in my training is about that particularly, but I think it's important because almost every technology media course uses some kind of uh, LMS, and in our case, Canvas. The university recently switched over to it, and so I linked to the internal Canvas website for Idaho State, which already has a lot of stuff, so I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. And then I put in some outside sources too, of just things I looked at that talked about things that I've observed and learned over the years about Canvas and other LMSs, things I thought would be relevant for my audience. And finally, to get to the professional development here, I designed a half day in-person training, and my idea was to emulate the exact experience that these instructors will use. So in other words, it would take place on both campuses. We would communicate and use the same technology that I'm teaching about. And again, they're not brand new to this. They've all used it on some level, so it's not like throwing them into the water, but also I think it'll help reveal some of the nuances of what it is from from a student's perspective, because I'll be working with the teachers. Importantly, I don't want any students present for this. I want the teachers to be able to relax and not feel the pressure of having to get their content out. I want them to focus on the technology. So I explain a lot of that here in the background and rationale. I have an agenda here that you can scroll down and look at, and this is probably good enough for most people, but I did link to a Google Doc that has comments on it, and I intended these comments to be like sort of my notes as the presenter in this. And so, the agenda itself isn't particularly helpful to anybody or to most people, but I have this deeper, more detailed stuff that I would help guide through. And so I didn't want to be just a technical training, but hopefully I can integrate some of the things that I've observed over time, and then also explain why knowing these things is important. Okay, just a quick example is wait time. A lot of times teachers will ask a question to the far site and give up because they're staring at a screen and just hear total silence because there's no microphones open. When in reality, there's probably some chatter going on and somebody's looking for a microphone, and then they have to get the microphone and push and talk into it. And so I talk about just simple things like that, like allowing more wait time when you're in a mediated format. Um, yeah, so back to my original site, I do have um, a scope and sequence matrix where I can kind of test instructors on kind of what level did they get it? In other words, can they just say it, or are they able to apply it? Various things that we covered during the training. And then I built in some time for them to do it, not just experimentally, but with some specific goals. So I gave them like some situations here where they could do that. So that's kind of my intent, was an in-person training that gives them some choice on what they want to focus on. Of course, we're going to cover all the main elements of it. There's some differences between the rooms that I get into that's probably not germane for this discussion here. And then finally, I did put yet another 5-question assessment form where these are more open-ended, where I left a lot of, I want them to give me some, in their words, feedback, and then of course rating it is fine, but the star thing is not that important to me. This stuff in the middle, I think, is the most, where the instructors can articulate in their own words what worked well, what didn't, how they plan to use it, those kind of things. So that's the overview of my website. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening. I enjoyed the class. I learned a lot. And I'm going to stop it here because I'm kind of blabbering, but there's a lot more to say and a lot more to share. But thank you for watching.